This is lecture 69 in the series, The ABCs of Communism, which accompanies volume 5, in this case on communism in South Asia. We're going to be taking a look this time on lecture 69 on the communism in Sri Lanka. Now, Sri Lanka, as you may know, used to be called Ceylon. At any rate, beginning as I usually do with the geology, I want to point out that Sri Lanka is part of a 2 billion year old Precambrian craton. It was originally mostly sedimentary rock and part of the supercontinent of Gondwanaland. It was connected with the craton of the Indian subcontinent until that Indian collision with collided with the Asian plate that formed the Himalayas some 45 million years ago. Now, after this collision, a small piece of that craton became the base of Sri Lanka and separated from the Indian plate. This separation caused earthquakes and volcanism that created some volcanic rocks on the island. Now that Sri Lanka is sitting on the top of a stable craton, there are no longer earthquakes on that island. Therefore, the geologic history of the inland features mostly metamorphic rocks, along with a small amount of volcanic and sedimentary rocks. And the metamorphic rocks are rich in mineral deposits, including iron ore, zinc, manganese, molybdenum, nickel, cobalt, arsenic, wolfram, tellurium, and gold. And there are numerous precious gems found on the island as well, including rubies, sapphires, topaz, and spinel. There is so little marine limestone that there are only very few natural caves in isolated spots. There are small caves and rock cellars created by erosional rainfall of this tropical climate, and people from the lower Paleolithic to modern times used them. There are several Buddhist cave temples, as a matter of fact. At any rate, fluctuations in the sea level led to Sri Lanka being linked to the Indian subcontinent from time to time over the past million years. Now, the last such link occurred around 7000 BP. Now, geography. Sri Lanka, formerly called Ceylon, is an island nation in the Indian Ocean southeast of the Indian subcontinent in a strategic location near major Indian Ocean sea lanes. The nation has a total area of 65,600 square kilometers with 64,000 square kilometers of land and 870 square kilometers of water. Its coastline is 1,340 kilometers long, and the main island of Sri Lanka has an area of 65,268 square kilometers, is the 25th largest island in the world by land area. The largest offshore island is Mannar Island, M-A-N-N-A-R, that was connected to the Indian mainland through the Adams Bridge, or sometimes called Rama's Bridge. That land connection to the Indian mainland is now submerged, with only a chain of limestone shoals remaining above sea level. According to temple records, this formerly complete natural causeway was breached by a cyclone in AD 1480. Now, Sri Lanka's climate includes two tropical monsoon seasons. December to March features the northeast monsoon, and the southwest monsoon runs from June to October. Now, the terrain of the island is composed of a low, flat, sometimes rolling plain with mountains in the south-central interior. And its highest point is Mount Pura Talagala at 2,524.13 meters. Natural resources include mineral deposits, precious metals, gems, limestone, graphite, phosphates, clay, and hydropower. Now, in terms of primitive communism, we go to the lower and middle Paleolithic for a quick summary. As we've seen in this volume, the Himalayan foothills of the Indian subcontinent have yielded evidence of humans having lived there 2 million years ago. The earliest dates for Homo sapiens in peninsular India are 600,000 BP, that is in southern India. Now, the geographic connections to the Indian mainland until historic times means that an age comparable to that of India, from the peninsular to that of the Himalayan foothills, is certain for Sri Lanka as well. So during the Pleistocene, the sea level would have dropped sufficiently for creating such a connection on at least 17 different occasions. certainly within the last 700,000 years. Now, the last sea level caused separation from India. Causing that separation would have been around 7,000 years ago. So there's been a land bridge off and on there for a million years. It is therefore probable that humans were present in Sri Lanka as early as 2 million years ago. There are ancient coastal sands in the north and southeast of the island that could be as old as 250,000 BP and others 700 to 500,000 BP. So we shall begin by reviewing primitive communism on the island of Sri Lanka, and that is the prehistory of Homo sapiens in the lower Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, and the chieftain phase of the island's Iron Age. Now, there is evidence of Paleolithic people at Ratna, Sri Lanka from about 300,000 BP, and possibly even as early as 500,000 BP. These people made tools of quartz and chert, according to the most recent archaeological publications in 2004, one titled Prehistoric Basis for the Rise of Civilization in Sri Lanka and Southern India from the journal Frontline, and I give the references. And there is more evidence of settlement by primitive communist people in Sri Lanka by 125,000 BP, and again I give the references. The Upper Paleolithic now features the Balandoga people, that's Balandoga, named after the area where remains were discovered, who colonized the island before 34,000 BP. They have been identified as cave-dwelling Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. Payangala Cave has yielded more similarly dated human remains, so all within the what we call the Upper Paleolithic. Several of these caves, including the well-known Bata Dambalena and the Fa Hien Cave, have yielded many artifacts that point to them being early inhabitants of the island. There is evidence from Bele Lena of salt brought in from the coast earlier than 27,000 BP. Now we go to the Mesolithic, which follows the Paleolithic, where we have several small granite tools about 4 centimeters in length, earthenware remnants of charred timber, clay burial pots dating to 8,000 BP, and they have been uncovered in recent excavations around a cave at Waranaraha, Mahavihara, and the Kalatuwawa areas. By 6500 BP, these people had domesticated dogs, and the bones of those dogs are found in Nigala Cave and Belanbandi Palasa. The Mesolithic site of Belanbandi Palasa in Sabaragamuwa province of Sri Lanka was occupied around 10,000 BP. And we know that from the bones of 15 different people. Nilgala Cave has tools reminiscent of the European Magdalenian, dating to the Sri Lankan Mesolithic. That doesn't mean there's any connection to the European Magdalenian, but they have the same types. The investigators think the dogs were used for driving game. The Sinhala hound is similar in appearance to the Kedar dog, the New Guinea dog, and the dingo. They may all derive from a common domestic stock. And faunal remains indicate the presence of domesticated jungle fowl, pigs, water buffalo, and some kind of cattle, possibly the BOS ancestor of the Sri Lankan neat cattle that's been extinct since 1950. People created what are called the Horton Plains, Horton, in the central hills of the country by controlling burning of trees as a horticultural and hunting strategy. Evidence from the plains indicates beginning horticultural management of oats and barley by about 157,000 BP. Now, that's not domesticated, but it's a management, a kind of management that of wild seed-bearing grasses. And then I give the references for that, which published in 1996. Now let's take a detailed review of the archaeology for primitive communism. As we've seen in this volume, the Himalayan foothills of the Indian subcontinent have yielded evidence humans having lived there for 2 million years. The earliest dates for Homo sapiens in peninsular India, that is southern India, are about 600,000 BP, and the geographic connection to the Indian mainland until historic times means that an age comparable to that of India from the peninsular to that of the Himalayan foothills is certain for Sri Lanka as well. So during the Pleistocene, the sea level would have dropped sufficiently for creating such a connection, as I say, on at least 17 different occasions, and certainly within the last 700,000 years. So the last sea level caused separation from India around 7,000 years ago. It's therefore possible that humans were present in Sri Lanka as early as 2 million years ago, and there are ancient coastal sands in the north and southeast of the island, which I mentioned before, that are date to 250,000 BP and some 700 to 500,000 BP. These deposits may contain evidence of human habitation, and they should be a future research objective for the next generation of archaeologists. Another group of sediments that could yield remains of early humans in Sri Lanka are the gem-bearing alluvial gravels of the Ratna Pura district. These Ratna Pura beds are of different ages but contain remains of Upper Pleistocene fauna, including a hippopotamus with 6 incisor teeth, a rhinoceros dated in the Lunugalam gemmed gravels at 80,000 BP, and the bones of a lion. Associated with this fauna are stone artifacts named the Ratnapura industry. Among them are very large choppers and flakes of quartz and chert. Now, as we've seen, by 125,000 BP, there were prehistoric settlements in Sri Lanka. The evidence stems from excavations conducted in coastal deposits near Bundala. Patirajawila yielded a small flake stones tool industry from horizons dating to 125,000 to 75,000 BP, and the Bundala Wellangangoda had comparable material from 80,000 BP. So these are people who left behind camping sites, and of course, being primitive communists of this period, they lived by hunting and gathering. We know what the physical and biotic environments they confronted looked like. The environmental oscillations in animal and food plant resources affected human population densities, and we think that during pluvial episodes in South Asia, such as the one at 125,000 BP, the population density in the dry zone of northern, eastern, and southern Sri Lanka ranged between 1 and 2 individuals per square mile. On the other hand, in the western wet zone, densities would have been less than 1 person per square mile. Hypothetically, the interpluvials witnessed a narrower dichotomy in zonal population densities, and given the concomitant densities of the food supplies, it is unlikely that inland large communities had densities more than a couple of nuclear families per square mile. Larger populations would have inhabited the northern and eastern coasts with their rich resources of marine foods. Now, after 37,000 BP, the prehistoric record is nearly complete for Sri Lanka. Cave excavations in the lowland wet zone at Fahian Lina near Bula Sinhala run between 37,000 continuously to 5,400 BP, and that's one key type site, therefore. Others are the Bata Domba Lina near Kurawita that run continuously from 31,000 to 11,500 BP, Belilena at Kitulgala that run continuously from 300,000 to 3,500 BP, Alluvial at Atanagoda near Kegal at 10,500 BP. Now, radiometric and thermoluminescent dates from the open-air site of Melanbandi Palasa near Imbilapitia agree at 6,500 BP, and there are over 50 such dates from various contexts at these sites, and the chronological framework is accordingly well anchored. Prehistoric humans in Sri Lanka are collectively referred to as Malangoda in popular parlance. People stood at a height 174 centimeters for males and 166 centimeters for females, and their bones are robust, with thick skull bones, prominent brow ridges, depressed wide noses, heavy jaws, and short necks. The teeth are conspicuously large, and these traits have survived in varying degrees among the Vadas and certain Sinhalese groups, thus pointing to Malangoda people as their common ancestors. There would have been unimpeded gene flow between southernmost India and Sri Lanka in both directions from the Paleolithic onwards. Malangoda people settled in practically every nook and corner of Sri Lanka, ranging from the damp and cold high plains, such as the Horton Plains, to the arid lowlands of Mannar and Vilpattu, to the steamy equatorial forests of Sabaragamua. Their camps were small, rarely exceeding 50 square meters in area, which is what we would expect for bad-level people. This lifestyle is seen among the Vadas of Sri Lanka, the Kedar, Malapantaram, and Chenchus of India, the Andaman Islanders, and the Semang of Malaysia. They would have been moving every year from place to place, foraging for food. The well-preserved evidence from the caves and Bellanbandi Palasa indicate that a broad spectrum of wild plants and animals were exploited, including canarium nuts, wild breadfruit, and wild bananas, and I give the scientific names. These would have been dietary staples, as among all ethnographic South Asian hunters and gatherers in recent times. Every conceivable type of animal was eaten, ranging from elephants to snakes, rats, snails, and small fish. Their diet was well balanced, as evidenced by the robusticity of the human skeletal remains, and there is no degeneration of bone as accompanies a Neolithic revolutionary carbohydrate diet and a sedentary life. The toolkit of Balangota people was distinguished by geometric microliths comprising small, that is less than 4 centimeter long, flakes of quartz, and rarely chert, fashioned into stylized lunates, triangular and trapezoidal forms. And as you know, such geometric microliths are the hallmark of the European Upper Paleolithic to Mesolithic periods and the New World Upper Lithic in Proto-Archaic. Artifacts of bone and antler are quite prolific after 31,000 BP, and this is especially clear with the sudden appearance of small bone projectile points. Beads of shell have been discovered from these early contexts. The occurrence of marine shells at inland sites such as Badadambalina points to an extensive network of contacts between the coast and the hinterland, and there is evidence from Belilina that salt had been brought in from the coast earlier than 30,000 years ago. Now finally, in Sri Lanka, the microlithic tools date early as 31,000 BP at Badadambalina, 28,000 BP at 2 coastal sites in Bundala, and over 30,000 BP at Belilina. In Africa, we know that geometric microliths date earlier than 27,000 BP. Now, the Balangota people interred their dead of all age and sex within camp floors, but these were secondary burials, as only certain bones were selected for this purpose. At Ravanala Cave and Fahian Lina, red ochre had been ceremoniously smeared on the bones. Both these practices are seen in the mortuary customs of the Andaman Islanders, which is going to be the third in this island lecture series. Agricultural revolution now. The transition of the Upper Paleolithic Mesolithic period into the agricultural revolution in Neolithic Sri Lanka has yet to be worked out. What must come is a McNeish interdisciplinary style search for these origins. There is palynological, that is pollen evidence, from the Horton Plains for the incipient management of barley and oats by 17,000 BP in a proto-horticultural agricultural phase. And there are remains of Bos indicus, that is that kind of cattle, by 10,000 BP, so they were being domesticated. Then there is Doravaclina rock shelter and its geometric microlithic industry in association with what appears to be a cereal, and a crude red pottery by 7,300 BP, and black and red ware, BRW, by 5,100 BP. There is the Manti site where a geometric microlithic horizon dating to 3,800 BP with a few pieces of slag has been found, and this would indicate the knowledge of copper working as manifested in southern India by 4,000 BP. Now, the stage of tribal agriculture. At all three sites we have proof of the tribal agricultural stage in formation. In Sri Lanka, this stage was some 13,000 years in development, from 16,000 to 3,000 BP, and the people of Sri Lanka witnessed the evolution of their tribal agricultural stage into the stage of simple chiefdoms. And then some of the latter entered the ATC stage. It was during the ATC stage, that is advanced theocratic chiefdoms, that iron metallurgy emerged, marking the line for the beginning of the Iron Age in Sri Lanka. Comparable to the Horton Plains material are the Gari Mar and Akkupruk in Afghanistan and the Mehrgar in Pakistan, which had a Neolithic subsistence strategy by 9000 BP. And there is evidence of herding in northern Rajasthan by 9000 BP, and for rice and pottery at Koldiwa, UP, India by 7000 BP. So cereal management and farming evolved in the Nilgiri Hills of South India by 10,000 BP. Thus, Sri Lanka constitutes yet another hearth for the domestication of plants comparable to the incipient plant domestication of the Natufian in Syria, Lebanon, and Israel at 12,000 to 10,000 BP. The search for Neolithic Chalcolithic settlements in Sri Lanka means finding the animal and plant domesticate precursors, pottery, and copper alloy working in contexts predating the early Iron Age, and it's probable that these will be found in association with geometric microtools such as the Neolithic Chalcolithic assemblages in peninsular India of the same time that have microliths. Now, as to the advanced theocratic chiefdom stage, this is also the early Iron Age in Sri Lanka and in India. The ATC early Iron Age appears in South India by 3200 BP. The earliest manifestation of this is in Sri Lanka, radiocarbon dated 3000 BP at the Nurad Pura site and the Alluvial rock shelter in Sigiriya. It's probable that further investigation will push back the Sri Lankan lower boundary to match that of South India. Now, as for the site called Anuradha Hapura, it's an advanced theocratic chiefdom. It exceeds 13 acres in area and did so by 2800 BP, and 100 years later it was 64 acres in size. Thus, at least one of our tribal agricultural settlements had evolved into a true urban town. So far, no other settlements of this period have been located in Sri Lanka, with the exception of a very small-scale deposit within a rock shelter at Alluvial. On the other hand, there are potential sites at Kandarodai, Matota, sometimes called Mantai, Kalaniya, and Tisamaharama. Now, the megalithic ATC mortuary complex of Sri Lanka is akin to that of peninsular India, according to Sonia Seneviratne in her 1984 paper, The Archaeology of the Megalithic Black and Red Ware Complex in Sri Lanka, published in the journal Ancient Ceylon in 1984. So these megaliths are dated 2750 to 2400 BP at Ibankatuwa. The exact place of this mortuary trait within the overall ATC culture in Sri Lanka is uncertain. For our purposes, the most important thing is that such megalithic monuments, wherever found, are diagnostic of the socio-cultural evolutionary stage of developed simple chiefdoms and then of advanced theocratic chiefdoms. Similarly, as she says, the BRW ceramic tradition characterizes much of the early Iron Age of the subcontinent, and it is not confined to the megalithic mortuary facies in peninsular India. This is a point, she says, that is frequently overlooked. There is a tendency to equate the BRW, the Black and Red Ware complex, with the megalithic complex on a one-to-one basis, thereby distorting the basis of interpretations from the outset. And she thinks it's important, therefore, that the nature of this separate but important relationship of factors be clear. That is, between A, the total early Iron Age complex of the subcontinent, B, its BRW ceramic complex, and C, the megalithic cemetery complex in southern India and Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan data is interpreted for our purposes for its stage diagnostics, and the agricultural potential of Sri Lanka with plenty of water, combined with iron technology, to cut down the dense equatorial rainforest and plow the forest soils, stimulated the autochthonous process of chiefdom evolution. The pearl banks in the northwest of the island and the copper ore source at Suravila made the island a potential hub for long-distance trade between Southeast Asia and West Asia. Therefore, Sri Lanka's attraction for settlers from further afield than South India appears to have gained rapidly. This potential coincided with the second urbanization of the Indo-Gangetic Plain. As mentioned earlier, Anuradhapura was a Sri Lankan town by this time. Thus, the phenomenon of the Indian second urbanization stimulated long-distance trade as a source of capital accumulation. ATC evolution proceeded accordingly toward ranks becoming classes, and the ATC into becoming a slave-stage kingdom. And that brings us to the transition to the historical period. The early Iron Age of Sri Lanka, that is 3000 to 2500 BP, led to the invention of writing that appears by 2600 BP, and the first writing is in Brahmi and is almost identical to the Asokan script some 200 years later. This marks the commencement of the early historic period, since history, the prehistory-history dividing line is always the invention of writing. Now, this writing is radiocarbon dated on charcoal from 3 locations in the citadel of Anuradhapura. It is confirmed by the thermoluminescence dating, and most importantly for our purposes is that that the writing is inscribed on potsherds and it signifies ownership. So we have private property of pottery. Within the first appearance of writing at Anuradhapura, there is a new suite of pottery, namely the historic BRW and its wares. For example, a medium fine gray ware, possibly a North Indian import, red glass beads, writing styli, pens made of bone. So we have long-distance trade and culture contact. The legend of Prince Vijaya's arrival in Sri Lanka from North India is concomitant to this phenomenon. Now, the early 2600 BP inscriptions on pottery at Anuradhapura are in Indo-Aryan Prakrit, as are the earliest inscriptions found in Megalithic Kodumanu, and possibly in the lowermost levels of Arak Medu as well in South India. So far, none of them are in Dravidian. Therefore, Indo-Aryan was preferred from 2500 BP in Sri Lanka, confirming the chronicling the Aryan impulse associated with Vijaya. Now, Professor Parpala postulates long-distance southward migrations of ruling Indo-Aryan elites by 2500 BP. The urbanized ATCs and kingdoms of the Ganges Plains constituted the nodes from which they centrifugally developed their peripheries. Trade would have assured that traits would be returned centripetally. Thus, as we would expect, a relatively closed interactive system would evolve into long-distance trade with West Asia, the Mediterranean, and China. Long-distance trade existed during the ATC Early Kingdom Iron Age with Southeast Asia and West Asia, and the onset of urbanization in Sri Lanka by 2500 BP accelerated its autochthonous evolution. By the time of Emperor Asoka in the 3rd century BC, the city of Anuradhapura was nearly 130 acres in size, making it the 10th largest city in India, Sri Lanka at that time. It would have been the largest city south of the Ujjain in northern India. Now we come to 2 millennia of slave and feudal stage modes of production. Buddhism took root as the ideology for submission of the masses to class injustice, inevitability in Sri Lanka. Coinage was introduced, proving the emergence of the servitude epoch. The slave and feudal stage, Asiatic mode of production, with its technology of irrigated agriculture, was extant in Sri Lanka's early Iron Age. Sri Lanka developed sophisticated and large-scale irrigation systems that served as the economic foundation of the class dictatorships of the early historic slave stage kingdoms period. Now, we come to milestones in the fight for modern communism, jumping up to more or less modern times. In 1943, the Communist Party of Sri Lanka, CPSL, was founded as the Communist Party of Ceylon. It was formed from the United Socialist Party, or USP, itself formed by the pro-Soviet wing of the Lanka Sama Samaja Party. Of course, the colonialists proscribed the USP, that is, they outlawed it. Both the USP and the CPC were initially led by Dr. S.A. Wickramasinghe. In 1952, Wickramasinghe's wife, the English-born Doreen Young Wickramasinghe, a former leader of the Surya Mal movement, was elected to the Sri Lankan parliament. Now, 8 years later, we have the beginning of the split of the international communist movement into two lines. In 1963, the theoretical clash between the Soviet Communist Party and the Chinese Communist Party was in the open. Shan, representing the Chinese faction, did not give up on the CPSL and began boring from within, starting the Kamakura newspaper. Meanwhile, in 1963, the Communist Party Lanka Samaja Party, LSSP, and the Mahajana Eksath Peramuna formed the United Left Front, or ULF. In 1964, the pro-China section of the CPSL formed the Ceylon Communist Party Maoist, CCPM. There was a close relationship between the Nagalingam Shanmugathasan of the Ceylon Trade Union Federation, nicknamed Shan, his outfit abbreviated SCTUF, and CPC Chairman Mao Zedong, and other leaders of the Communist Party of China. The ULF ended in 1964 when Prime Minister Sirimavo Bandaranaike offered ministries to the LSSP and the CP. Shan took the main trade unions of the Moscow lining CP with him, along with most of the leaders of the All Lanka Peasants Congress, into the Peking lining communist movement. Shan then stood on the reviewing stand with Mao at the great May Day celebrations in Beijing. In 1968, the CP joined the LSSP and the SLFP in the United Front, and Shan organized people of the lower castes for the first time. In 1970, CPSL leader Peter Kuhneman became Minister of Housing and Construction. CPSL leading member B.Y. Tudawi became Deputy Minister of Education, and S.A. Wickramasinghe and Indika Gunawaradina maintained support for the government. In 1977, after the general election, and for the first time in half a century, the CPSL found itself without parliamentary representation, receiving only 2% of the vote. However, after a subsequent election petition, the very popular communist Sarath Mutawigama, who died in 1986, was anyway elected to the Kalawana seat in a by-election. Later, the CPSL joined the People's Alliance. This was a broad cross-class front led by the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. Now, in 1970, the CCPM was one of the two major left parties in Sri Lanka. The founding General Secretary was Nalalingam Shanmugathasan, the trade unionist, nicknamed Shan, and now Maoist revolutionary leader. The leftist campaign in this country identified him by his nickname Shan almost always. He dedicated his time and knowledge as a revolutionary for Sri Lanka. Shanmugathasan followed the teachings of Mao Zedong and launched the CCPM, and many in Sri Lanka learned the ABCs of politics from Shan and his closest colleagues. So we want to take a closer look at him. In 1920, Shan, that is Shanmugathasan, was born in Manape in Jaffna. Shan had his primary education in Jaffna. In 1938, he entered Colombo University. His major was Western History, in which he obtained a degree. He was an outstanding student leader, student body president, and secretary of various student associations. In 1943, Shan left the university, and with his qualifications, it would have been possible for him to obtain the post of a lecturer, but instead he joined the CPSL at its inception. In 1947, 4 years later, he committed himself to making a success of government employees' strikes. He also devoted himself to the 1953 Hartel strike action. He learned and taught Marxism-Leninism as a talented lecturer, adept at delivering lectures in English, Tamil, and Sinhala. Shan became a Maoist that stood up on behalf of the Tamil people, always oppressed by the Jaffna ruling castes. In 1965, the People's Liberation Front, or JVP, was founded with the aim of becoming the vanguard for socialist revolution in Sri Lanka. Then there were four other left political parties. One, the Lanka Sama Samaja Party, LSSP, established in 1935 as the first left party in Sri Lanka. Two, the Communist Party of Sri Lanka, CPSL. Three, the Mahajana Eksath Peramuna, MEP. And four, the Ceylon Communist Party. Now, the national economic crisis was then deepening. Since independence, the two main capitalist parties, the United National Party and the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, had each governed the country for 8 years. The JVP said neither had been able to implement even a single measure to resolve the crisis that Sri Lanka faced. The JVP considered the entry of three of the left parties into the government in 1964 as a conscious betrayal of the aspirations of the people in the working class. Now, this takes us to Ratna Wijiwira. During this period, Ratna Wijiwira was studying medicine at Lumumba University in Moscow. There he read the works of Karl Marx, Frederick Engels, and V.I. Lenin, and became a committed communist. By this time, the Communist Party of Sri Lanka, CPSL, was divided into two factions, the Chinese faction and the Soviet faction. Premalal Kumarasiri led the Chinese faction. Premalal Kumarasiri was born on the 12th of December 1919 in Gona Piniwala, a village in the south of Sri Lanka. There he attended the local village school and then Ananda College in Colombo. After graduating, he took up full-time work for the Communist Party of Ceylon, and in 1947 he had been elected to the first Parliament of Ceylon, representing the Hakmana electorate as the Communist Party's candidate. At only 28 years old, he was then the youngest sitting member of the Parliament. At any rate, through his father's political activities, Wijiwira met Kumarasiri and joined his Communist Party staff. He made the trade union office the home of the Chinese liners. And in 1964 he broke with the Soviets and was consequently banned from the USSR. Now, the split in Sri Lanka. Wijiwira knew that the old left had not produced enough professional revolutionaries, nor had it made a meaningful effort to educate the masses in Marxism, since what the leaders of the old left said was accepted by workers as the final word. They could, and that leaders could and did, utilize their positions to blunt the militancy of the workers by not educating them. In 1966, Wijiwira and others decided to launch a new party explicitly revolutionary in character. They started from scratch, and in the period that followed, the cadres engaged themselves in political activities that consisted mainly of trying to increase the political awareness of the working class. Wijiwira decided to generate a Marxist analysis for the masses. An uncomplicated Marxist analysis of the social, political, economic problems of Sri Lanka should be the introductory step, and accordingly there were 5 lectures for discussion along 5 major themes. Now, throughout 1968, Wijiwira walked the length and breadth of Sri Lanka, conducting these political classes for party members. After taking these 5 basic classes, members were qualified for a secondary level education camp. Naturally, this curriculum had to be a secret from the government and the traitors of the revisionist Old Left. Both the initial classes and those at camp, all conducted by Wijiwira, stretched from 17 to 18 hours a day, interrupted only by meals. So, by 1971, 3 years later, the People's Liberation Front, Janata Vimukti Peramuna, or JVP, launched an armed struggle against the capitalist SLFP regime. The JVP was now a political party offering an alternative to those disillusioned with the politics of the other left organizations, and the majority of the members and supporters of the JVP at that time were in the young adult age group. Alarmed at the political potential and the political challenge of the JVP, the CAP government and its revisionist allies leveled a variety of slanders against the fledgling party, but that was only to be expected. Now, on 9 September 1976, Mao Zedong died, and Subsequently, the senior leaders of the party selected Deng Xiaoping to lead them, as we have discussed extensively in the final section of Volume 1 and also in Volume 3. In Sri Lanka, it took a while for Shan's party to understand what was happening in the international communist movement, and they shared in their confusion, a general confusion of the international communist movement. In 1987, the People's Liberation Front, the JVP, launched its second armed struggle, this time against the capitalist UNP government. In 1991, a conference was held which reconstructed Shan's party as the Ceylon Communist Party Maoist. Shan Mugathasan led the party until his death in 1993, when on February 8th he passed away in London. In 1994, the People's Liberation Front, or JVP, became a Marxist-Leninist party in the Sri Lanka parliamentary election. This was the same movement that had launched the two armed uprisings against the ruling governments in 1971 and 1987-89. The movement now entered democratic politics by participating in the 1994 parliamentary election as a political party, and it has been a third party in Sinhalese Sri Lankan politics ever since then. In 2004, the CPSL had one member of parliament, its General Secretary, D.E.W. Gunasekara. Gunasekara was expected to become the Speaker of the Sri Lankan Parliament, but in the event he lost by a handful of votes. Gunasekara was then sworn in as the Minister for Constitutional Affairs. Let's take a closer look at him, Dr. D.E.W. Gunasekara. In 1958, Gunasekara joined the Communist Party of Ceylon. He wrote for the party's newspaper, Mabima, and was a youth leader. He later became a member of the party's Central Committee and eventually the party's General Secretary. In 1988, the CPSL, the Lanka Sama Samaja Party, LSSP, the Nava Sama Samaja Party, and the Sri Lanka People's Party formed the United Socialist Alliance, or USA. In 1989, Gunasekara was one of the USA's candidates in the Matara district parliamentary election, but all of them failed to win any seats in the district at that time. Now, on the 20th of January 2004, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, the JVP, formed the United People's Freedom Alliance, or UPFA, and in February of that year, 2004, the CPSL and LSSP joined the UPFA. Gunasekara was appointed as UPFA Nationalist MP in the Sri Lankan Parliament following the 2004 parliamentary elections. Gunasekara was put forward as the UPFA's candidate for Speaker, but was defeated by opposition candidates W.J.M. Lokubandara after three dramatic rounds of voting in Parliament, and Gunasekara was appointed Minister of Constitutional Reform in May of that year, 2004. And on 28th of January 2007, he was given the portfolio of national integration. In 2010, after the parliamentary election, Gunasekara was reappointed as the UPFA Nationalist MP and appointed Minister of Rehabilitation and Prison Reforms after the election. He then became Senior Minister of Human Resources in November of 2010. In the 2015 parliamentary election, Gunasekara was placed on the UPFA's national list of candidates. However, after the election, he was not appointed to the national list. He lost his cabinet position following the 2015 presidential election, but he is the current leader of the Communist Party of Sri Lanka, CPSL, and a leading member of the United People's Freedom Alliance, UPFA. And the current situation with regard to Sri Lanka is that its leadership is very anxious to participate in the Chinese Belt and Road program. So at that point, we're going to stop our discussion with Sri Lanka, and in the next lecture, we'll move on to the Maldives.